Hello, dear friends of freedom. I decided to translate this very well-made video report from the Frontline in Ukraine by the respected German news magazine Spiegel. Let's take a look. The east of Ukraine, not far from the front line. The Ukrainian police wants to evacuate an elderly couple from their bombed home, but there is artillery shelling very close by. We have to wait until there is a ceasefire when we pick up the people. We are in contact with our colleagues from the military. They will inform us immediately when the fire has stopped, then we'll get out. We all work closely together. When the field commander finally gives the green light, there is only little time to react. Their goal is the village of Marianka, about 10 kilometers from the embattled town Donetsk. An air raid caught the elderly couple by surprise while they were waiting in a basement to get evacuated. Behind the last checkpoint, the front line runs between Ukraine and the separatists supported by Russia. With every kilometer, the tension increases. Suddenly, the helpers have to stop. There are impacts right next to the road. We wait now. Close the door. These are likely Russian warplanes that are bombing the connection road but miss their target by almost 50 meters. The team reaches the completely devastated place without getting hit. Valery and his wife are hiding in one of the many ruins while they wait for their evacuation. Come quickly, father. Thank you, thank you. Go, get inside. I'll pass you the bag. Was that all? Okay, take a seat. Now everyone has to leave the battle line as quickly as possible, because the shelling could continue at any moment. They will spend the coming weeks or months in a culture house which was repurposed as a refugee accommodation. Their belongings, a few plastic bags. Putin did not let them keep more than that. Everything was blown up. Even the door of our basement was destroyed. And here, look at that on my neck. I got hit by something on my head. I really don't feel well ever since. The married couple has to sleep in a shared room with others who, just like them, have lost their home. At least there's electricity, warm beds, and running water here. But the shock is still greater than the relief of being rescued. They have not only lost their home, but all their belongings too. They are staying here for now. Later on, they will be taken to permanent accommodations. No one knows whether they will ever be able to return to their village. There are no forecasts in this war. Driving north towards Liman. At the end of September, the region was recaptured by the Ukrainian army. What the Russians did here resembles an extermination campaign. Destroyed houses, bombed infrastructure, and countless deaths. For around 5 months, the population was at the mercy of the occupying forces. On the outskirts, a mass grave. For a few weeks, victims of Putin's special operations have been exhumed here every day. Many of them were civilians. In the sky, a Ukrainian jet gives them cover. The front line is only a few kilometers away. On behalf of the Ukrainian prosecutor, forensic specialists collect evidence of possible war crimes and charges against the Russian dictator and his soldiers. Many of the dead are victims of bombardments. These are fragments of a corpse. We are unable to identify them. Because of the bad condition, we can't determine the age or even the gender. What we see here is chaotic. Body parts everywhere. Most of the victims are decomposed. It will be difficult to give them their names back. Until the beginning of October, around 100 bodies were found at this site, including 43 Ukrainian soldiers and 5 children. And the number is increasing every day. As soon as the identification is completed, the police takes over and tries to clarify the circumstances of their deaths, a task that will take years. Among the victims to be recovered was a young man. He was murdered. He lived here on the outskirts of this town. The police knows that he was called Sergei. They don't know the circumstances of his disappearance. Today, the head of the unit, Maxim Berishnoy, is looking for answers and asks people who knew him. Do you have a second? Do you know anything? Yes, we heard the rumors that people got killed there.
Was denn? Wir haben gehört, dass da irgendjemand getötet wurde.
But many citizens don't really want to talk to the policemen. After the Russian occupation, uniformed men are often not welcomed. This elderly man decided to help. As far as I know, he lived in that house. The man knows that house, but he doesn't want to talk about what happened there. The people are anxious, traumatized. When we first came here, they didn't say a word. They were so afraid that they couldn't even look us in the eyes. Instead, they put their heads down and did not speak to anyone, like some kind of oppressed nation. They still haven't found out anything about the circumstances of Sergei's death. Then, suddenly, a woman appears on the street. She turns out to be the mother of Sergei. It was her son who was found in a mass grave. On the evening of May 26th, my son went to an acquaintance down the street. From there, the Russians took him away. There were witnesses who saw that. I then reported him as missing, and all our relatives looked for him. Everyone hoped that he would come back, but then he was found in a shed on June 19th. He was so badly beaten up that you could not longer recognize him. Her son Sergei was only 30 years old. That's him. He was a joyful young man who was popular amongst everyone. He always provided the villagers with food because the supermarkets were all closed during the occupation. He also helped to distribute humanitarian aid on the streets. He was actually a person who avoided every type of conflict. Everyone liked him. He always had a smile on his face, and he was always there for me. The death of her innocent son. It is as pointless as all the war between two nations who used to be brotherly nations. When the Ukrainian army recaptured the city of Liman on the 1st of October, a months-long martyrdom ended for its inhabitants. After heavy fighting, the Russians had abandoned the strategically important transport hub, leaving behind military equipment and lots of wounded and dead converts. Today, the small town Liman looks like a desert of rubble. The random bombings of the invaders destroyed most of the buildings and roads. 20,000 people once lived in Liman. Many have already fled. Others did not make it in time. This is a residential building with a direct hit fired by the armed forces of the Russian Federation. It happened on the last day before the occupation. We still tried to save the people. There were many injured at the time, and it was a very sad picture. Today, it looks like this. Please take some more. I thought there were 2 of you. No, there are more. I'll call the others right away. Police officers distributing canned meat from their own stocks. The whole city has been suffering. For 6 months, we have no gas, water, electricity and internet. On the 23rd of May, they bombed our house, and there's nothing left. The Russians have told us that they will rebuild everything. Now, the Ministry of Civil Defense wants to start securing the roof. How helpless this project can be is shown a few steps further, because the house where the women lived before the attack has no roof anymore. Up there, in the 4th floor, I had a 2-room apartment, and that's where the rocket came from, and then everything collapsed.
Und von dort kam die Rakete und dann ist alles zusammengestürzt.
The reconstruction of the country will take years, and according to Ukraine's estimates, it will cost $750 billion. It is still unclear where the money will come from. This money will not be able to replace those civilians who were bombed to death in Liman. Here were a lot of small market stalls. There they have been selling household goods, and there was a large hardware store. Upstairs was a flower shop, which means there were many people here. After the attack, there was a fire for 3 days. Russian propaganda bloggers were not ashamed to show again and again for days how they destroyed this part of Liman. In front of the few food distribution points, people are gathering. Fleeing was not an option for them. They are demanding something else. We simply need more weapons. The Russians are in the majority, and we are much fewer. But if our army got more weapons, then we could definitely beat them by the turn of the year. Kupiansk is 100 kilometers north of Liman. Shortly after the start of the war, the mayor at the time handed his city over to the advancing Russians without resistance. The occupiers remained for 6 months. They deployed their own administrative staff and turned the local police station into their new headquarters. In the corner, within the station, stacks of Russian police uniforms can be found, unworn and packed. Here you see a uniform. I would say it is a completely normal police uniform. It is a summer uniform, and this is a hat for the winter, and this one for the summer. It is still lying around here in the boxes.
Das liegt alles hier noch in den Kartons rum.
The uniform wearers had apparently prepared for a long stay. Up on the 1st floor, the office rooms of the management were located. All rooms have been left in a hurry. The picture of Putin was hanging on the wall. Afterwards, it is now lying on the floor. By the way, we are currently in the office room of the former Russian police director. After the Russians left, Ukrainian specialists are now examining the files that were left behind. Here too, it is the vague hope to find evidence of possible war crimes. Look here, that was the living room of the police director. Everything is devastated. The director left his parade uniform for celebrative occasions. Next room, fire had to help to cover the tracks. They actually only fled when our people were just outside the city. In the basement, the cells were located. Here, all the people who didn't want to cooperate with the Russians were locked up. They took them as prisoners here. We heard from witnesses that here up to 20, 30 or even more prisoners were locked up in one single cell. Apart from some testimonies, there is no evidence so far that the inmates were tortured. Only one thing seems certain. It could basically happen to anyone. For example, a worker who was asked by the Russians to fix their equipment and refused, or a teacher who was forced to teach children Russian content. Apparently, the Russians are using old KGB interrogation methods. On the floor, a gas mask, possibly a torture tool to simulate suffocation. Next door, the occupiers have blown off some artistic steam with a painting that resembles the glorious Soviet era. And they left their Z symbol. The Z stands for Za Pobiedu, which is Russian for victory. It was a Ukrainian rocket that ended the nightmare. We drive to the village of Vishneva. Here, Putin's troops were downright hunting people. They turned the canteen of the local agricultural cooperative into their new headquarters. Ruslan Zhukov, formerly a member of a Ukrainian anti-terrorist unit, fell into the hands of the occupying forces at the end of August. For weeks, the Russians had been looking for him. They searched the whole area. They brought me here, undressed me, and started torturing me. They asked me where I served, who I am, and where my military documents were. I said that I burned my documents. Then they looked at my tattoos and called me a Nazi. They tortured me with electricity. The beating wasn't that bad. The worst was when they used electricity. It is still difficult for the 28-year-old to enter the room in which he was tortured. Why they picked him? His name was on the list that the Russians worked through systematically. Apparently someone has ratted him out, and not just him. They wanted to know where my two friends are. One was also in the military, the other one not anymore. They claimed that my grandma was helping to hide us. I couldn't prove that I was there alone, so they started to beat me. If the Russians had known he was not only in the military, but also in a special unit fighting separatists in the Donbass, they probably would have killed him on the spot. Instead, they worked on the Ukrainian coat of arms on his shoulder with a Bunsen burner. For them, that's a Nazi symbol. It's just a coat of arms, but in their eyes it means you're a Nazi, that you kill kids and stuff like that. I don't want to talk about it anymore. I just call them Russian effers. Ruslan Zhukov is severely traumatized by his experience. I think you can never get 100% healthy again when you have seen such terrible things. I actually need help. I would like to talk to a psychologist. I am a person who can endure a lot, but nevertheless, all of this just stays in my head and does not go away. Sometimes I have terrible nightmares. After the interrogation, the Bunsen burner, the insults and the torture, Ruslan is taken to an old basement. The military jackets of those who tortured him are still lying on the floor, left behind during their hasty departure from Vishneva. I had to sleep here. There was no bed. I was lying on such a wooden pallet. I had to stay here until the morning of August 31st. Ruslan's clothes are still here. After his arrest, the Russians stripped him naked. That's all that's left of my Lacoste t-shirt. Because he did not give them any information, he should at least lose his dignity. That was the Russian reasoning. That here were my shorts. They simply cut them open with a knife. On the next day, Ruslan was transferred to the provincial capital Balaklia and handed over to the Russian interrogation specialists. They had set up a torture center in the basement of the local police station. Today, local police officers are working here again. Above all, they are working on the reconstruction of what happened during the occupation. By now, they know quite well what happened. This basement was a real place of torture for people who were temporarily arrested, all citizens of Ukraine. They were tortured, harassed, or just bullied in this room. Sometimes they beat the prisoners until they were dead. They had bags pulled over their heads and they were handcuffed. They left nothing out to get information. Between the interrogations and torture, the detainees were locked in the cells of the police station. For weeks and under inhumane conditions and without their relatives knowing what happened to them. In desperation, a prisoner carved the Lord's Prayer into the wall on April 23rd, 2 months after the start of the war.
Wir haben immer geglaubt, dass sie ein Brudervolk
We
waren.
always believed that they were a brotherly
Niemand
nation
hat
of
damit
ours.
gerechnet, dass sie
Nobody
so
expected them to be like this,
Doch
to
sie
do
tun's
something like
immer.
this.
Jeden Tag
But they
vernichten
still
sie
do
ein
it.
weiteres Stück
Every
unseres
day,
Landes.
they destroy another
Sie
piece of our
zerstören die
country.
ganze
They
Infrastruktur.
destroy the entire infrastructure.
Jeden Tag
Every
sterben
day,
unzählige
countless
Menschen
people
an den
die
Folgen
as a
ihrer
result
nicht
of their
nachvollziehbaren
incomprehensible
und
and
absolut
absolutely reckless
stümperhaften
operations.
Einsätze.
From here, it's not far to the front line in Donetsk. The roads and bridges are largely destroyed. For weeks, there has been heavy fighting here, and the Ukrainians are gradually running out of ammunition. In the middle of the war zone, there's a hospital with injured civilians who did not want to leave their homeland and got caught between enemy lines. Many of the patients are seriously injured by Russian artillery. I was at home together with my wife. When I was lying in the bed, there was a huge explosion, and suddenly I see my own leg lying in the corner of the room. His injuries are so serious that the doctor could only amputate his leg. All the muscles are broken. I have no idea if I will ever be able to stand or walk again. Just leaving everything behind, I couldn't do it. But now I have to. Alexandra Sernikova is sitting in the next room and is happy to be alive. She was feeding the neighbor's dogs when the bomb hit her. I was told that it was probably a combat aircraft. I didn't hear it, just the explosion, but it wasn't that loud. I just ran until I saw that I was covered in blood. It's the evacuation team of the Ukrainian police who rescued Alexandra on the same day. The 43-year-old already has a pressure syringe to stop the blood loss.
Die 43-Jährige hat zu diesem Zeitpunkt schon eine Druckschlinge, den Blutverlust zu stoppen.
We'll bring you in the car now. But I can't sit here. The blood is running down. I will tighten it now.
Setz dich, setz dich.
Drive off, but slowly. While driving to the clinic, the Ukrainian police officers are trying to treat the injury on the leg. I will cover it up and bandage it now. The bleeding has already stopped.
Die Blutung ist bereits gestoppt.
The wound is not only deep, but also at least 10 centimeters long. Alexandra urgently needs an operation. You shouldn't walk yourself. Please, sit in here.
Du sollst nicht selbst laufen. Bitte setz dich mal hier rein.
If she hadn't been rescued so quickly, she would probably have lost her leg. So she was lucky in this month-long disaster in which over 6,400 peaceful civilians have died, including at least 400 children. The village of Stary Saltiv, 40 kilometers east of Kharkiv. To cut off the supply routes of the Russians, the Ukrainians became destroyers of their own infrastructure. With a targeted explosion, they blew up the bridge. It was the only connection to the surrounding villages. Meanwhile, the few residents who did not leave have set up a transport service with small boats. They go back and forth several times a day. Everyone is happy that the Russians were pushed back from here. Until August 11th, we lived here under Russian occupation. After 2 p.m., none of us left the house, because the Russians were already drunk by then. When they were drunk, they often started to shoot randomly. So after 2 p.m., nobody left the house anymore. Because there hasn't been any affordable petrol on the other side of the river for a long time now, there's high ferry traffic again today. The empty canisters will start the return journey well filled. I have brought a canister with me. Here, a liter costs 40 hryvnia. On the other side, it's 100. In war, those who benefit from people suffering make a profit. 100 hryvnia is about €2.70, profiting in a time of war. I can't swim. Don't worry, I can't swim either. I usually walk across the water.
Ich laufe normalerweise übers Wasser.
Winter is coming soon. Then the river could freeze, but people will find a solution for that too. The megalomaniacal Kreml dictator has not managed to break the Ukrainians. If you enjoyed this video, please give the original source video by Spiegel a thumbs up. You can find the link to their video in the description and in the pinned comment. Thank you.